So I'm Andre LeBoy. I'm an educational technologist here at Columbia. I'm just going to be organizing this session. One thing to note, I know it's a small room. We could probably hear each other just fine without the mics, but we're trying to capture everything. So if you have questions, I'll be coming up to you with a mic. So just try and, anytime you speak, actually use the microphone. So this is going to be a session centered around MOOC assessments. Our first speaker is Elizabeth Huttner-Loan from MIT. And we don't have a ton of time, so I'd like to kind of get us started. All right, so welcome.
Thanks so much, Andre. I'm going to use that one there. Hi, as Andre said, I'm Elizabeth Huttner-Loan. I'm the EdTech course manager for Eric Klopfer's Scheller Teacher Education Program Education Arcade Lab. And I'm also a Digital Learning Lab Fellow with the Office of Digital Learning at MIT. My co-author is Professor Eric Klopfer. He's the director of the lab. And I'm looking forward to talking with you today about our peer responses in the MOOCs. Do you mind closing that? So this is the kind of broad view of the X series. I'll be talking more about it individually, but if you go to edX, you will see these icons and you'll see our courses. So this is what my talk today will center on. So I'll talk a little bit about the overview here. I'll talk a little bit about the whole series, and then I'll also spotlight on two of the courses, notably design and development of games for learning. So before I continue, I want to talk a little bit about what our lab is about. The Scheller Teacher Education Program provides a pathway to certification for interested MIT students. This is a series of classes. Not all students do certification, but that is an option for interested students. And the other part of our lab is the education arcade part. So this is the games and simulation research, the sort of playful side of our lab. So I wanted to take a quick look at 3 projects. The first one is Tailblazer. Tailblazer is a location-based game. So it's running in several sites and also has a developer feature, which you see there. There's also Star Logo. This is actually a screenshot from Star Logo, the next generation. This allows both teachers and students to create simulations of certain things, certain phenomenons, like say the spread of forest fires, for instance. And the last project I wanted to mention is GameBlocks, and we'll hear more about GameBlocks later. So GameBlocks provides a block-based pathway for game developers, and it makes it easier. The burden regarding programming is lessened. So today I'll talk about our overall approach to the EdTech series of 4 courses, and I'll also present some data on completion and also forum usage as well. And we'll take a closer look at 11127X. Sorry for both the abbreviations and the number. That's the design and development of games for learning. And we'll also talk about our work using groups in our forums as well. So I just wanted to say a little bit about our overall approach to the series. It's very much inspired by the computer-supported collaborative learning approach pioneered by Jerry Stahl and several others. So we want our MOOCs to have a very important collaborative and interactive feature among the participants. We don't want it to just be, looking at the posted materials and that's it. So here is the X series, and I've actually put it in order of how we ran it. So the first course was the design and development of educational technology. When I refer to this course again, I'll be calling it DD EdTech. I know it's a lot of stuff to follow. So regarding the target audience for these courses, we were interested in attracting people throughout the educational technology arena, notably educators, also developers. For the first 3 courses, but for the 4th course, 11.133X, Implementation and Evaluation of Educational Technology, our target audience was really educators and teachers. So this is from all realms, K through 12, and also higher ed as well. I wanted to call your attention to the project section of the chart here. This is important. Our courses are project-centric, and each course has at its core one of these projects. So maybe it's a pitch, it could be creating an actual game, or for implementation and evaluation, it was a plan for implementing educational technology. So what do our courses look like? I'm going to briefly go over the course components. We have our interviews. That's Eric Klopfer right there, interviewing Constance Steinkuhler. So we really try to interview practitioners in the field. We want students to be getting information about various topics, things like assessment, things like evaluation from the source. We also have our forums. I'll be talking more about these extensively. You'll notice these are not the edX forums. These are a forum system that we developed. We also have, of course, assignments and project work as well. We have activity breaks. So these are meant to allow students to take a break from watching videos and actually do something. It could be interviewing something, it could be playing a game somewhere online. And then also we have completion checklists. So the way our courses work, we don't have quantitative grading like courses in the sciences and engineering may have. We use self-reported completion checklists that participants use to share their progress. These courses are about exploration and also the opportunity to do projects and practice skills in this arena rather than checking for, say, pure mastery of certain concepts. And then finally, we have game blocks. So game blocks figured prominently in 2 of our courses, and this is the system that allows students to create games using block-based programming. So, onto the forums. These are the edX forums, which many of you have seen before. They have some interesting features. You can see by recent activity there is some sorting. Maybe you can see the threads, that sort of stuff. We actually do not use this system. We developed our own system, which is based on WordPress, to get some additional features. I'll talk about that next. So these forums, like I said, were based on WordPress and were developed by my colleague, Paul Walton, and also others as well. And they have some additional features that I'd like to draw your attention to. So one is topic tags. We allow people to, our participants, to actually kind of organize their posts by tagging. We also have some different threading features. It's a little bit easier to find information. We have some advanced sorting features over here. We also have some things like avatars and that sort of stuff. So I want to take a look at the series at a glance. So you'll see our current enrolled numbers, which we all love. These are the amount of registrants. But I wanted to call your attention to the forum users. So these are participants that actually use the forums. They were at least in the forums once. So with courses like ours that are forum-centric, this is the number that's more important. These are the people that were at least somewhat engaged with the course material. Okay. I won't be talking about a lot of demographic data today. But one thing I did want to notice is that point out is for 11133X, we did have a very high proportion of educators. We've had educators in all of our courses, but that one especially. And I also wanted to explain for the total certificates, these numbers also include an older type of certificate that's no longer offered through edX. So this is the audit certificate. So some important things to note is that for this course, this is 11126X, the forum use was actually optional. So we had some users use the forums, and it's actually, I think, a somewhat high percentage considering. And let's see, and also for this first course, 11132X, not all peer feedback happened in the forums, and it's the same for 11126X as well. So we initially employed the edX peer feedback tool, and to be honest, it didn't work quite as well to suit our purposes as we would have liked. So we moved to a system where all feedback was provided in the forums. Okay. So I'd like to call your attention to the verified certificate numbers. What I think is pretty interesting is that of our latter 2 courses, the verified certificate numbers actually aren't that far off considering the size of the cohorts for both courses. Okay, so this is our Google Analytics data. Before I dive into this, I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page regarding the definitions of the data we're looking for. So forum users, these are participants that interacted with our website. So our website was accessed through a link in the edX courseware. Sessions are the amount of times that participants interacted with the website. And pages per session, so when the participants were there, how many pages did they look at roughly? And for session duration, we're looking at how much time they spent per session. Okay, so again, something to call your attention to is our first course actually had the highest amount of pages per session of the series. And to be honest, I'm not exactly sure why this is. So remember, for this first course, we also used the peer feedback tool as well. So not all feedback was done in the forums. So it's pretty interesting that we had a lot of forum activity in this course. This course also had the highest average session duration as well. So just a few other things to point out. So I wanted to call your attention to 11127X. This had the highest number of sessions and also the highest number of forum users as well. So this is our survey data. This data is from the edX survey that we're required to offer as part of our courses. For this particular survey, we were unable to adjust the language, and you'll see for the next course we were. But I wanted to show you a little bit of what our participants thought about our forums. Now, granted, this is only a subsection. I wish we could increase participation in the surveys, but it still is a lot lower than we would like. So for the discussion forums here, most people, I would say, thought it was at least good, and we actually had a fairly high proportion of very good as well. What's interesting for this course is the number of students that said very important. When I show you the data for the course after this one, you'll see the change there. So this is for the course after 11127X. You'll notice that the very important category, we have quite a few more that suggested that the forums were very important to their experience. The other thing to point out here is that for this iteration of the survey, we were actually able to alter the language. So we were able to say peer review and discussion, which I think is very helpful. So now I'll move into talking about 11127X peer responses. This is the design and development of games for learning course. So why are we focusing on this course? One, we had the greatest number of forum users, and also this course had 6 units. It really worked ideally for us to take pulses of how the participants were doing. So we could look at one assignment from Unit 1, one from Unit 3, and one from the end in Unit 6. Before we dive in, I wanted to show you what one of our assignment prompts looks like. So all of our assignments have 3 common components. We provide an introduction and explanation. Why are we doing this assignment? What are we supposed to do? That sort of stuff. We also have instructions regarding the deliverable. What are the participants supposed to submit? And then we also have peer feedback guidelines. So I wanted to ask you to take a look at these for a moment. This is from the first assignment, assignment 1.1. So you'll notice that we provide instructions regarding how many participants they're supposed to provide feedback to. And when we say posts that appear below, we mean in the forum threading system. And we also say, for some reason those people have received feedback, make sure to find someone that hasn't. We continually say that peer review and peer feedback is an important part of this course. And these instructions are one way that we help guide that. For this course, we've had fairly open-ended prompts. The first course that we ran, 11126X, experimented more with rubrics. Okay, so for this research project, we considered the responses of participants in these assignment threads holistically, and we thought kind of at a higher level what kind of posts we see. And we identified 3 different types. So we have prompt-driven, so participant makes it completely clear that they are guided by the prompt that we gave them. Helpful constructive, so the participant is genuinely trying to help the other participant improve their work, but it may be along a different vein than we set out in the prompt. And comment thought. So this can be any type of thing from good job to, and not that much feedback, or some kind of story or anecdote. Now I want to make it clear that these aren't the only kind of posts we see in the forum globally, but I'm just concentrating on the assignment areas of the forums for now. So you're probably wondering, what do these look like in real life? Here's an example of a prompt-driven post. And this is in response to that assignment I showed you just a few slides ago. So I can tell that this user genuinely intended to be following the prompt. They addressed the question about the learning tool, and they also talked about how the participant analyzed aspects of the learning game. Now, we didn't explicitly require participants to use the prompt. There was no, say, oversight where we would catch them if they didn't, for instance. So this is an example of a helpful constructive post. So there are many types of these. For instance, this one talks a little bit more about game mechanics. We might have some that talk more about learning objectives. It just varies. Classroom applications, that sort of thing. The final one is an example of a comment and thought. Now, I want to be careful as I talk about these. I don't intend or want to portray them as negative. A lot of times these participants are genuinely intending to respond to the participant that has put their work out there. And sometimes that response is more of an anecdote, that sort of thing. And sometimes that story is meant to help the participant along. But these comment thoughts tend to be, well, a little bit more like this. So we'll talk a little bit about the methodology. So after we identified these categories, we selected 3 assignments, as I explained earlier from the course. And we only considered topics and posts submitted before the end of the course. Let me explain the use of the terms topic and post. So topic is like the thread. So it's the submission that kind of starts off the chain of postings, for instance. And posts are responses to that initial setting of the topic. We utilized the equivalent of a coin flip to decide if a post was included, just to get a sample. And then we considered each post in terms of the types of peer responses that we were identifying and coding for. So I want to just give a quick summary of the 3 assignments. So for 1.1, you saw that it was a pick game, try to evaluate whether you think it's a learning tool, and also discuss your definition of a learning tool. And then for assignment 3.1, we asked participants to create a prototype for their own learning game with documentation about several items. And for 6.1, assignment 6.1, they were asked to finish their project and reflect on the entire process of making their learning game. So one thing I want to point out about this methodology is that this is still just one course. We only had one coder, and we're using fairly big buckets per se. We could do a similar study where we're using a more nuanced approach, or maybe we're breaking out certain types of helpful constructive posts or comments or that sort of thing. So let's take a look at the data for 11127X. So to start, I want to take a look at the total topics and posts for the assignment. So you'll see there are these topics, and these are the posts that follow them. So actually, one topic can actually spur a lot of posts. And you'll see during our sample how many topics we included in the project. I also want to point out that we did come across several topics that had no peer response. So for this particular assignment, that participant did not get any response from a peer. I wish that didn't occur. I would like to take a look at those users that didn't get, say, a response on the first assignment and see how it had affected their participation over the course. But actually, the numbers, at least of our sample size, were fairly small. We also saw other types of posts. So I thought that there would be more of these than there turned out to be. These are things like someone posted a resource. So they didn't post a response to the assignment. They may have posted a technical question, that sort of thing. These are these other posts. So I want to call your attention to the post here at the bottom. For assignment 1.1, most of the posts were classified as comment and thoughts. So there's a number of reasons why I think this is the case. One is this is the first assignment. People were just getting the hang of the forum, still kind of figuring out how it works, how to respond to peers, that sort of stuff. The other thing is it may be the nature of the assignment itself. So this was an open-ended assignment, which asked them to kind of think about their definition of the learning tool and, evaluate a game in a way that they thought was valid. Now, if you take a look at assignment 3.1, this is the one where they had to actually create a prototype on their game. There's a lot more helpful constructive posts in assignment 3.1, and I think this is because the participants were now working on their project for the course. They cared a lot about this assignment, and they wanted to improve their game, and they also wanted to help others improve as well. So that's why I think we saw more of these type of posts there. And you'll notice that the numbers for prompt-driven are very low. So this is for a few reasons. One, sometimes it's hard to identify for sure that the participant has really been influenced by the prompt. So some participants have made it very clear, but a lot of them didn't. So maybe they touched on some of the issues, but it's hard to tell if it's really helpful, constructive, or inspired by the prompt. And then the other thing, for assignment 6.1, our peer feedback instructions were very open-ended. We asked them to respond to their fellow participants about how they can move the game and the project forward. So with the prompt of that level of it's just not very specific, it was really hard to identify if anyone had really chosen to respond to that prompt. So I'd like to move to groups. One aspect that we also have of our forum system is groups. So there are two types of groups that our system supports. The first is affinity groups. So any participant can create these groups, and they can be about any topic. Maybe it's about teachers that live in Brazil, or say homeschooling teachers. And these are participant driven. We do not, the course staff does not found these groups. And the other type of group is a newer group that we introduced for the third of our 4 courses. And we wanted participants to be able to fill out a survey and actually be put in a group and see how that would work. Question, poll for the audience. Do people think that the affinity groups or the survey-based working groups are more active? Raise your hand if you think affinity group. Okay, what about survey-based working groups? All right, we've got more for that one. Okay, so I want to talk more about the survey. We asked participants to say the hours that they can commit to working for the group that week. There are also availability regarding time of day and also the unit they were working on. Especially later in the course, we have people join us in the MOOC at various times. They may be working on different units. And also we asked them a few questions regarding skill level of certain areas as well. And certain factors were weighted more than others. For instance, the unit was weighted higher as well as the hours than, say, the skill level questions. Okay, so let's talk about groups. Well, we had, for 127X, we definitely had plenty of survey-based working groups generated, and we had about 850 students try our survey-based approach. And if you notice, for the second course, we had a smaller cohort, but we did have some that filled out the survey and a smaller amount of groups generated. And let me tell you about the survey-based working groups is unfortunately these groups were not active. Occasionally we would see some introductory posts, but these, I don't have even one example of a survey-based working group that really took off and became, a cohort or a group or team that worked together on a project. So this is something that we're still experimenting on and would love to do to do better with. I mean, there's so much interest. Students do want to find people to collaborate with, but just finding a way to match these people and to get them to work together is still something that we have a lot of work to do. About the affinity groups, I wanted to at least present some stats about the greatest number of members and also the greatest number of posts. And these are not the same groups. The affinity group with the greatest number of members did not have the greatest number of posts. I think there's several reasons for it, including the lurking phenomenon. People are really excited about a group called Games in Higher Ed, but maybe they don't have much to say on the topic yet. That's one reason. So I want to tell you the names briefly of the groups, the affinity groups that were the most popular. So for 11127X, the game development in higher ed had the most members, but the math games affinity group actually had the most posts. The math games group was especially active. And then for 133X, the EdTech X designers had the most members, but a group called MOOC Plus, which was thinking about MOOCs, actually had more posts. So I want to talk a little bit more about activity in these affinity groups. So members sought feedback from each other on work in the course. They made connections and in some cases even met up in real life. And they also provided additional resource and discussed content, both course content and content elsewhere. Just wanted to tell you a little bit more about what we'll be doing sort of for upcoming projects. We're going to be rebooting one of our courses, 11132X, Design and Development of Educational Technology. And I say reboot rather than rerun because we will be making some changes. Some changes to video content, but not as much in that realm. And we're also still working to develop new ways to understand and track participant forum participation. These forums are such a rich place to see how learners are learning and interacting with each other, and we would really like to do more to improve that. And we also want to encourage collaboration among our participants and also group work. We also would like to document our process for new development and continue examining it critically so we can improve and make a better product. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think we're right at time. So are you going to be around for any questions at the, the casual? Okay, great. All right.
You don't want it?
Just give us 1 second while we set up and change computers. Next we have Matthew Cecil, who's going to be talking about are MOOCs adapted to team project-based learning?
So, hi everybody, my name is Matthew Cecil. I'm from Paris, Escachamps. I'm going to talk about project-based learning. And I would like to provide a bit of context before. I'm a graduate student in my fourth and hopefully last year of PhD. And I'm not at all from a PBL or computer-supported collaborative learning background. I study MOOCs. My PhD is about indicators of success and factors that increase those indicators. So it looks like the next talk. But I don't have an instructional design perspective, but sociology of online learning and self-regulated learning perspective. So, a bit of context. Firstly, you might be interested to know that in France, we have a MOOC platform, a national MOOC platform led by the French Ministry because of education, because we are a socialist country and startups do not work out very well there. So when the ministry started, there had been 2 MOOCs that had been launched previously. One was designed by our team on project management, and the other one was a CMOOC. And they wanted to train to launch a French MOOC industry and to train teachers that would design great MOOCs, to fight back and to occupy the online web with French courses. So they used the OpenEdX code because they tried to develop one, but it failed, so they shifted back. and 200 courses were launched. And since I was among the handful of people who had designed a course and who were working full-time, they asked me to design a MOOC on MOOC design. And I felt like if you want to learn to design a MOOC, you should design MOOCs. So I asked people to work out and to do team project-based learning. Since OpenEDX was not meant for project-based learning, I had to outsource after a few failures on other tools such as IdeaScale, and to use a mix of OpenEDX and IdeaScale to just like for team formation or things like that. So a few studies, I asked them to design their MOOC, and we had an OpenEDX platform running, and they had to do everything from teaser, they had to do their teaser, presentation, instructional design, budget, and to post on the LMS. So quite a heavy workload for MOOC. Let me show you the workload. This is the average workload from the 200 French courses. It is weekly workload between 1 and 6 hours a week, and mine is around 15 to 20. So that's the last one, Mika's. Yeah, because I didn't want people to succeed in designing their MOOCs. I wanted to understand how hard it was, and maybe they should not go into a MOOC design. If they could not do this MOOC, they could not do a MOOC in real life. So a bit about the statistics, like number of registrants. This is the French platform. These numbers are supposed to be confidential because they're quite political, but who cares? So you can see that the top biggest courses we have in France are around 30,000 people, which is the average size of the Coursera MOOC. And I was among the small courses. Well, you can bet that MOOC design is not like the huge industry, like there are not thousands and tens of thousands of people who want to design MOOCs. Maybe they're wrong if they want to. But I had a few enrollees, like 5,000 to 2,000. And you can see that with such a heavy workload and such objectives, there were not so many people who actually designed a MOOC. But I had designed 2 tracks, one for analysis for those who didn't want to work collaboratively, and the other one which is called design track, which was meant for collaborative learning. And you see that out of 5,000 people, between 90 and 40 people actually design MOOCs and show projects, even if many people propose projects. So much for massive open online courses. And from data collection, I had surveys, of course. I have surveys in maybe 30 French courses. I had surveys in my course, the beginning and the end of the course. And the thing is, I had access to learning analytics, but they weren't complete. But learning analytics cannot help you much to understand what is happening in PBL, since most of the activity takes place outside of the LMS. We do not control what happens. We have very little access to what happens from the platform. So my main instrument of research, even though I mostly rely on learning analytics in daily life, was semi-structured interviews. So a kind of qualitative approach. So just like to finish with the context, interestingly, I asked people if they had current projects going on related to the course, like if they were planning to design, if they were actually in the process of designing a MOOC. 70% of learners were currently involved in a project. And I compared to the baseline, this is never the case in MOOCs. Like most people have projects for the future, or sometimes they do not have any application in mind. I just show a few ones about physics, astronomy, creativity, but I have 20 other MOOCs that show pretty much the same result. People have projects for the future, but they are not very concerned about ongoing projects. And if you look about it, most of them were projects on the workplace. So you see the dark blue, 50% were actually working on design of MOOC. I do not know whether it is specific to project-based learning, like it attracts people who are already motivated, or it's just a course-specific effect. But from what I've seen with other MOOCs based on PBL, it seems to be a pattern, though we cannot prove it with only a few courses. Okay, issues posed by PBL. Of course, you can expect all the usual problems that teamwork involves, such as people who do not work and so on. But openness, what is specific to MOOCs? I guess openness is the main stuff, and it poses obviously some kind of problems. First thing, you can see I ask people to propose ideas, to comment ideas, and to make teams within 2 weeks or 3 weeks before the launch of the course. So these are weeks on the axis. You can see that you have only 2 weeks to find a team, and so they are affinity groups, what was called. It's kind of hard for people who do not know each other to work in such a way. And from the interviews I got, many people said it's just not possible for me to team up with people I've never met before, and that I need time actually to work before collaboratively. A few other examples. The mass of information. You know the web, the power law of the web. When you have an idea, like one idea is like YouTube. One idea is going to draw most of the attention, whether you like it, you look at it from the number of votes, the number of comments perspectives, and most ideas that will be proposed will have no attention, no comments. So it is kind of a problem when you want to form a team, and I hope you can all see that. But he's saying, basically, one of the project leaders said, okay, some people were contacting me, but when I was answering, nobody would answer back. Finally, he decided to design his own MOOC on his own, his project on his own, because most of the time it would not work out. When we look about the size of the teams that were generated, there's maybe like a third of the participants who had to do their project alone, not because they didn't want to have a team, but they could not manage to form a team. And you see like big teams, like 4+ teammates exist there, so it's not a complete failure, but most of them were relying on very small numbers. And I want to show also, to understand also why there's such a team formation problem. For instance, this is the other way around. That was a learner who wanted to join a project and who could not, and finally decided to do the individual track. And I met a teacher who was actually working on the MOOC with her students, and who told, yeah, I asked my students to propose projects, but they didn't have to carry them out. So many project proposals were fake. Like, it was just for fun. They were just like proposing projects. Yeah, I want to do that, but actually I don't want to do it in the MOOC. It's just like not serious. Like, there's a real problem of being serious for project proposals. And of course you can expect it. And this is the reason why people say do not do PBL in MOOCs, is drop out. Like, you spend a lot of time when you have a team to try to identify who works, and maybe like half of your teammates, I don't know if you have tried a PBL-based MOOC, I've been a team leader in such a MOOC on Novaed many times. It's really hard to manage a team which disappears half of the time. And there are many reasons behind it, and one of them I'm investigating is the question also of the leadership. Like, people who do not agree with how the things are going or with the ideas of a project, in a company they will have no choice but to comply by the project manager. In a MOOC they don't agree, they don't like, they just leave. And they do leave. So it's quite hard for, but all those results are quite, like, one could expect them. Which is more important is not that the issues that we met. What I liked were the coping strategies from learners who actually were aware in advance of such problems. For instance, one of them was trying to reconstruct the survey-based selection process. He would hire teammates. He would not accept teammates. There would be the interviews, there would be a survey to understand what they were likely to bring to the project or how much they would agree to commit to the project. And such strategies are actually quite common in PBL MOOCs. Like, do not rely on what people say, just like have a selection process of your own and not just of the platform. There were also other strategies like teaming up on the workplace. We have met many people who said, okay, I don't want to meet or to work with people I do not know. And we would say, at work, we have many people interested in such project in the MOOC, and we are going to gather and to form a team together. And one of them was telling me, like, I want to work with my coworker because I know her. We know how each other works, and we have been working together for a long time. And it is quite a pattern. For instance, I'm trying to understand in MOOCs how people register and interact together. And you can see that there are many MOOCs where people just register alone. Like, for instance, that the last column, you can see that in MOOCs in mathematics, they are very like kind of lonesome experiences. And there are some courses, for instance, the one on creativity and in my MOOC, where people register with the intention to work together, to interact together. So I'm trying to get more detailed data about the kind of interaction they are trying to put in place before the MOOC. So I believe that it is quite, it's not that surprising actually that we have such a pattern. But it is interesting to see how spread it is. And other things is, there are like long-term relationships that appear in MOOC, and I have noticed it in my course. For instance, like there are teams which had formed at the beginning of the first iteration of the course. They still work together. They do all the iterations together, and they are like hunting for like other MOOCs where they can practice PBL. And there's a core nucleus of MOOC learners like crazy. I call them, many call them actually super MOOCers, who actually even meet in real life afterwards and try to carry on the project in real life. And there are a few of them, a few projects which I've seen and developed actually. And some of them have actually even like done companies together. They have founded companies together. For instance, you can see like if people encounter or not in real life, and for the design track, they're of course more likely to encounter. So this is one example from one iteration of the course, but we are currently running surveys across dozens of courses to see if such patterns are likely to occur or not. Of course, it's like 90+% do not meet. And when they meet, it's during the course and they do not meet each other. But that's a nice way also to see if PBL is likely to foster network formation. It's kind of a big deal in the MOOC narrative, but it's not such a huge phenomenon actually. So I will not talk much more because I really want to discuss with you. Yeah. The key points, like it is really likely, I guess, I believe, and I want to prove it, that the PBL MOOCs are really likely to attract people with ongoing projects, and which it's such a huge investment time that you don't do it just for fun, like you would watch that documentary. Of course, there are specific issues associated with openness, but what is nice to see is if for each of those issues there are coping strategies. Which are from team formation to team management. Okay, so the fourth iteration will be announced next month. So I have new surveys and really open suggestions about data collection and so on and so forth. Thank you.
So So we do have some time for questions. If you don't, like I said it earlier, please use the mic so we can pick it up in the camera.
Thanks. Very nice talk, thank you. Armando Fox from UC Berkeley, and I have quite a bit of interest in scaling up small team project-based learning. And I thought one of the reasons your talk was interesting is in large courses on campus, we actually face some of the same problems in team management. So I wanted to ask a couple of things, if I'm allowed to have two questions. Two problems that you mentioned were dropout and leadership issues, teams not really being able to rally behind a leader. With respect to dropout, why don't we have that problem as much in campus courses? Because if the students do that, they'll get a bad grade for the class. I imagine the equivalent for a MOOC would be charging for admission or something, and then you lose your money if you choose not to participate. Maybe the French socialist government wouldn't allow that, but have you considered some sort of a bar that students have to pass before they get admitted to a project team to demonstrate seriousness?
Yeah, we cannot do that for money because we are supposed to be free and so on and so forth. And it's very controlled by the government. So even if I do believe that that would be one of the most efficient way to prevent this kind of phenomenon, maybe we should do a very long survey to be sure that they are motivated enough. If they are motivated enough to do such a long survey, that would mean that they are more motivated to engage in a course and not.
Or maybe there's some pre-work in the project that each person can do individually, and only the people who finish it get to continue and become part of the team. Something like, something that makes them prove they're serious, because that's a terrible problem to have. My other question regarding the leadership issue. So I teach a software engineering course, and when we get to the part about how teams work together, we actually present practices from the sort of behaviorist light literature, certainly from the software engineering management literature, because a lot of the sort of personal dynamics that happen in a team, for a lot of people they're obvious, but for engineers you have to explain it. So we actually say, if this happens in your team, consider these strategies. If this occurs, try to resolve it this way. But the idea is we actually give them almost some recipes. Have you tried doing something like that? Because most people who haven't done a lot of PBL actually don't know how to work in a team. That's a skill that has to be learned. So have you thought about how could you provide some scaffolding to teach team techniques?
I thought about it, though. I was kind of natural selection kind of teacher. So if they do not manage to do it by themselves, then they will not. I'm not a project manager kind of teacher. And other thing that I asked them is to follow a project management course we had designed before they could do it properly. But I do agree that scaffolding would be one of the solutions. It is interesting to note that some people have their own strategies, some teams have their own strategies to cope with leadership issues, such as leadership shifting. Each week they would have a different leader and such. And I guess I agree that maybe we should do that. So it's kind of a huge amount of time for instructors to go to this level of detail, and it's debatable whether the cost is cost effective.
It's I'll relinquish the mic, but I think a reason that instructors ought to get it is, by the way, a lot of work. I agree with you, but just as the students are learning the skills of the course by being in a team, they're also learning the skill of being in a team. And that skill actually seems to be transferable to a lot of different organizations. So that's why I lose some sleep over it.
I agree. I believe that maybe I should do some efforts to improve that part of the course.
All of us. Thank you.
So I wanted to thank you for your talk too. I teach at a community college, so a little bit of an audience that might be different than other people who teach at, but more similar to maybe MOOCs, because it's open enrollment. And I teach a PBL course, intro level IT course that is taught entirely project-based, 7 projects, all topics in IT. At least 3 of them are group-based. We have a lot of attrition. That's what happens in community colleges. I don't know how much you know about U.S. community colleges, but and one of the things that I've done to facilitate or to incentivize not to have dropout and not to be bad teammates, so to speak, is that they peer evaluations at the end of the group, and their grade is based on their peer evaluations. They actually lose, so the project is evaluated, the deliverables are evaluated initially, and then based on your team evaluation, which also includes a self-evaluation, you get a grade. Demotion, essentially. of your deliverable. Also, I allow them to self-select teams that change, so they don't stay with the same team throughout the semester. So if you are a bad teammate, you run the risk of other individuals not wanting to work with you. And it has happened only once that I ended up with a whole group of individuals nobody wanted to work with. And interestingly enough, their final project, none of them actually produced a deliverable. And so I guess that what that says to me is they weren't going to do the work no matter who they were working with, and so maybe it was better that they weren't bringing down other individuals. But thought this was really interesting. A lot of what you talked about I see, because I teach it online and I teach it in classroom. I have a lot of students that come out of the PBL in the classroom format that continue to take the rest of their courses together, continue on. Less so in the online version, but much smaller, not this large. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, in the first iteration of the course, we had this plan of putting this peer evaluation in the team. Though what happened next is like we use OpenEdX, and it's hard to mix team evaluation within a team and the OpenEdX system, which is peer evaluation. Like it doesn't work out that well. So it was.
It's a new feature coming though too.
Yeah, we do a very similar thing to what Jamie. We just use Google Forms.
Yes.
And what we tell the students is that your teammates cannot see the rating, but the instructors can see it. We actually do it every week. So it's like a 6-week project, but we actually ask them to evaluate, because then we can see a trend also. Someone who starts weak, but then they take it seriously.
I do paper.
Yeah.
Yelp for students though.
Yeah.
For the online version, I just
Okay.
haven't sent them.
Nice. Really, if we can integrate it with OpenEdX, definitely we should.
Google Forms.
Yeah.
We're just about out of time. Is it quick?
I guess Adam Finkelstein from McGill. We're in the midst of running a social learning for social impact on edX, a big collaborative small group working MOOC. And I think you touched on a couple of interesting things. I think just like at university, we often take for granted that students know how to read and know how to write. And I don't mean that facetiously, I mean that absolutely true at university. We also take advantage that people understand how to collaborate. And I think that in a MOOC, it's 100 times more difficult because it's virtual. And I think we take that for granted, and we've even seen that where, how to get people together for a meeting. Like, what do you do to organize yourselves? I mean, those sort of basic questions we take for granted face-to-face. And in face-to-face, you have a lot of sort of body language, and you can just meet and hash it out. And you just can't do that online. And I think that's sort of a level of organization that I think you're alluding to with that. The coping strategies, I would sort of think of these as like scaffolding strategies. How can you help people work together? Because I think that's a huge barrier. The other flip side to that too is I think, MOOCs are non-transactional learning spaces where, we're not giving people grades. We're not using external factors to beat people into groups. We really need to work on, it's really a motivational issue. And it's like, what are they doing? And I think getting back to, a lot of the research on collaboration, that it's not a bad team, it's a bad task, and trying to figure out what sort of really good task can we set out so that we get people and scaffold people in the right direction to get them to a successful team. And I think that sort of that virtual team at scale is a real nut to crack into some situations. So I appreciate your comments.
We are going to move on, but I'm sure we can find time to chat about it after. Right, thank you.
Let's look this up.
Yeah. Yes. While you're setting up,
Yeah.
why don't we actually get to that question?
I just have a quick comment, and then I know the first question was regarding if we can't really charge money to create that motivating factor, what can be the alternative we can do? I was thinking about you mentioned that a lot of students in your class mentioned that they didn't even have a lot of time to get to know each other. It's hard to work with a stranger, and there's like I'm not accountable for showing up. But then in real life, we all know that if we're want to go to the gym to work out, if I call my friend, I feel like I'm accountable, I'm more likely to go. So what if is there a structure, just open thought, that we can encourage students to interact with each other more often to a level that they will feel like they know each other and they're more likely to be working together without the external motivator, like you paid money or not.
Yeah, like breaking the ice kind of games before the MOOC. That would be an option. Is it the idea?
it could be similar, but for kind of like collaborative activities, you know, informal ones that's interesting, and it's not a lot of like, you know, it's not require a lot of effort, but that's great because kind of like interesting getting social credit from each other before undertaking a project.
Nice, Andy.
All right, thank you so much, Matthew. Really appreciate that. So as you can see, next up is Measuring MOOC Success with Andrina Parisi Anand. Is it great? Aman? All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all. I'm really excited to be here, and the work that I'm looking at is also in collaboration with Nick and Jung Hao, who are the two analysts that did a lot of the work that I'm presenting today. So as you can see, I'm from Coursera. We are all part of the team there working to provide the world's best courses online. And to date, we have 15 million learners that are able to take almost 1,400 courses, and that's all thanks to our current 128 and growing partners. And so it's really through all of the partners and the instructors there that are sharing their passion and their expertise with learners through the courses that they are creating. That's making it possible to work towards this mission really of changing learners' lives through access to education. And so as we're all working toward this, we want to understand what makes MOOCs successful. How do you pinpoint the thing that like, oh, this is going to be a great MOOC or this isn't? And I think as a community, we have to come together and say, what is success? So we look at it from the point of view of learners, like are learners being able to meet their goals? But that's also a really tough question, right? And so with all these tough questions, this is where some of the data comes in. And so the data can't tell us what we should be saying is success, but it can help us to start figuring out what are the things that we can measure, the right proxies to point us towards those areas of success. So being in a really privileged position of being the platform, we have access to a lot of data that helps us to start moving towards this idea or trying to figure it out. And so last year, we did a study where we looked at over 800 courses that had been run on the platform. This connected to 11 million learners with connected to 50 million enrollments and over 700 million video lectures that were viewed. And the type of data that we were able to look at sort of ran the gamut. There was course metadata, so the things that you're pulling from the platform, you know, what are the demographics of the learners, how long are the courses, there's attributes to the videos, which again can be things that we can pull directly, or annotations that we can crowdsource to get a sense of what is in the videos, feedback from the learners themselves that are taking these courses, as well as the design and the structure of the course. And so I could talk to you all day about the different investigations and kind of areas that we could go into and look at and things that we could kind of noodle on and think about, but we have a short period of time. So at the risk of everyone walking out the door as I give the punchline, there are 3 findings that I want to talk about today. One is that success is multidimensional. The second is that learners want to master difficult subjects. And the third is that being interesting retains your learners. So some of these may or may not be so surprising as they stand, but I will now backtrack and go through each of them, how the data that we looked at leads us to these conclusions, and then kind of most importantly maybe what do these tell us as educators and as researchers? So let's jump right in. What do I mean by success is multidimensional? So the first piece is that successful courses don't all look alike. If we take what was the earliest kind of metric or ideal metric of success, completion, right? It would be so nice and so easy if we could just say everything is summed up in completion. And so just focus fully on this, and this single number is going to tell you everything that you need to know about whether or not a course is successful. But I think any of us that have gone into the data or have tried to figure out courses would feel pretty comfortable saying that it's just much more complicated than that, and we can't take it into one number. So what we looked at is a variety of different things that could be considered a success metric. In particular, we looked at demand, which we used enrollment as a proxy, so how many learners are saying that they're interested in this subject matter. Retention, and so here we look specifically at as long as a learner had watched an initial video in a course, so they are somewhat active, what proportion of those then made it through to watch at least 50% of the videos in that course. satisfaction from the learners. This is self-assessed, so net promoter score of how likely are you to recommend this to a friend, how satisfied are you with the learning experience, and then credential value. And so that we're looking at the number of, if you take the learners that have completed, how many of them are then paying and getting the certificate at the end of the course. And so looking across all 800 of these courses that we saw, we found that these measures are not really strongly correlated with each other. So we can't just collapse them down into a particular number. And that goes to this idea that success looks different or can be different for different courses. So let's look at some concrete examples. Here we have two courses. One is teaching the violin and the other is introduction to finance. And these were very successful from the perspective of credential value. Learners that had completed these courses felt that it was really important that the subject skills that they had mastered, and they wanted to be able to share that with others, to show that to others in some particular way. But the retention was not particularly high. So of the number of people that enrolled and started, not everyone finished. And so to some, you would consider this successful, and on other aspects, perhaps not. On the flip side, if we look at these two new courses, Fiction of Relationship and Equine Nutrition, these are courses that in terms of sheer enrollments are smaller than what you're looking at in terms of the average. And the learners that were completing these courses didn't have a strong feeling to show someone a certificate that they had completed them. But they were highly retentive, and they were very satisfied learners that were in here. And so this is something that directly met what they were looking at learning, and they stayed through all the way and loved it. And then if we look at Andrew's machine learning course, this is a course that had 200,000 learners that have gone through it, or that have at least touched it, right? And to him, this was also a sense of accomplishment, but it's not super retentive. Those, though, that are in it and that are touching some part of it are very satisfied with the experience that they have within it. And so all of these courses are ones that, from one component or another, we would say are successful, but that success looks really different. And so if we take this idea of success being multidimensional, what does that mean for us as researchers, or what does that mean for us as educators? Is that it's really critical to state what is your metric of interest when you're discussing MOOC success, or how do we come together and figure out what are the ones that we want to be optimizing for. And so connecting to George's talk this morning, one thing that I think we can do to take on that challenge is how do we start bringing in that question of how are each of these MOOCs affecting the human person that is taking them? Can we bring that into the scope of things that we're considering a variable for a metric for success, to then be ranking all of our courses on that and thinking about how do we optimize that aspect of it. The second thing that I wanted to talk about is this idea that learners want to master difficult material. And so I think those of us have been in the classroom may likely all have at least one student that we can remember that just wanted things to be easy, right? They just wanted it to click, they just wanted to get the assignments done and over with. But this is really what we hope we see from learners, right? That they want to be taking on a challenge and figuring out things that are tough. So we came to this conclusion focusing on the metric of credential value. So we wanted to understand, over 50% of the learners that come to our platform say that their main motivation is for career improvement. So learning new skills that are going to help them either change jobs or move up in a particular job. And we see a connection to that with credential value. And so we were using this as a proxy to say that the value that a learner was getting out of a course, they felt was so important that they wanted to show it with a certificate to someone. And so with this particular metric in mind, let's look at credential value on two dimensions. So on learner-rated understanding as well as learner-rated difficulty. So let me just give you a second to dive into each of these. So each of the dots that you see on this graph is a different course that we're looking at. And on the y-axis, you have what is residual credential value. So we're taking that credential value of what is the proportion of learners that complete the course that are paying for the credential, and then we're controlling for a bunch of different factors, the most important of which we found to control for is subject area. So that really kind of, as of right now, washes a lot of things out. So you need to control for subject area. And then we're comparing that to learner-rated understanding of the material. as well as controlling for difficulty by putting it into these 3 different difficulty buckets. So the red is low, medium is green, and then blue is high. And so what we see is that down in the bottom right corner is where you have your easiest of courses. This is where learners have the highest understanding of the material, but the credential value is not that high. And so they are not finding it really valuable to prove or show with a certificate that they've been able to master something that they don't think is that hard. And you have very few that are making it up. There are a few, but there are few that are making it up into that higher range of credential value from an easier course. Then the majority of our courses are falling in this medium bucket, where the material is tougher, but you still have this spectrum of understanding. And then you have your long tail of really difficult courses. And so these are the ones that are really technically intense. These are ones where there's a much larger range of understanding within them, but they still have the highest level of credential value. And so within each of these buckets of difficulty, we see that there's actually a positive correlation between the learner-rated understanding and the credential value. So as that understanding is increasing, they're finding it more valuable to them. But also, as the difficulty of the course is increasing, they're finding it more valuable to them. And so we're finding that learners aren't looking to pay necessarily for an easy course that's just a checkbox, off to say that they've understood it, but that they really want to try and understand something that is tough. Another interesting point to this, so this is a line, if you were to just look at all of these data points together and try and get just a direct correlation between learner-rated understanding and credential value, you get a pretty flat, almost slightly negative correlation, and it's only when you're able to break it apart into these different buckets and control for difficulty and look within those that you have enough data to dive in and understand that it's that increase of understanding and increase in difficulty that's giving you an increase in the credential value. And so with this idea, what do we take from it? What do we use as the next step from understanding this piece? And so one piece of it is that as educators, it's really hard to make an easy course that's really valuable and satisfying. And so what we want to do, and I think what we all strive to do, is to teach hard concepts really well, so that you're making it accessible to the learner such that they're taking something that's really difficult for them that they see really valuable, but helping them to reach that gain in understanding that they're looking for. And as researchers, I think this highlights this need for a lot of data. So if you're looking at just a few courses, some of those correlations get lost, but it's when we have enough that we can control for subject area, when we can start controlling for difficulty level, that we're able to see some of these additional correlations. And so the last piece that I wanted to bring up is this idea of being interesting retains learners. And I think as it stands, this is not a surprising topic, right? We all expect that we are hopefully teaching something interesting when we get up in front of the learners. This is why we know enough about it that we can pass that information on to someone else, and we hope that learners find it interesting. Where this came from was looking at the metric of retention, trying to understand how do you make a really good course based on this idea that really good comes from keeping learners in the course. And specifically, we wanted to understand how do you make really good MOOC videos to keep learners in the course. And so to do that, we dug into a lot of annotation. So we crowdsourced annotations on all the different videos that were in these 800 courses, and we asked the annotators to look both at subjective impressions, so how engaging did you find the lecture, how animated was the instructor that was teaching, as well as more descriptive annotation, so how was the production quality, how many instructors were present. And then what we found from across these annotations is that they were actually very strongly correlated, and we collapsed them down into what we would call a metric of interestingness. From all of these, because they were so closely integrated. And so, what we can say from this is like, yes, okay, it makes sense to be interesting, but how? do you be interesting from the data? And the things that we found, again, are things that I think sometimes we take for granted, or if we look back and think about who were some of the best educators that we interacted with, you're like, oh yes, this makes sense. But now we're able to pull it out and say, this is actually somewhat teachable, right? Like if someone isn't feeling comfortable in front of the camera, it's going to make it really hard for them to engage with the learner. So how do we help them feel more comfortable? Or how do we help an instructor really get out there and share their passion and be animated when they're bringing the learners into the material, so that they can make that connection to keep the learner engaged. And just to give a sense of, perhaps it feels like this data is a little skewed, or what might be considered interesting across the population. Do you have any guesses of what was considered sort of the most interesting video on the platform? What type of course it might have come from?
Equine nutrition. People are really into that.
They are really into that. It's a good guess. That's not the one that was deemed sort of most interesting.
Social psychology, Scott
Scott Plus has a lot of huge fans, but that was also not the one that sort of deemed most interesting as video in and of itself. Any other guesses? So it may come as a surprise. It's actually from a calculus course. This is perhaps less surprising to me. I actually thought calculus was beautiful, but if we think about from a broad perspective, right, that's probably not the case. But if you look at these don't have to do with the subject area. And so I want to give you a second to just see one of the video from Jim Fowler's class from OSU that was in fact what's deemed most interesting. Oh, except the sound isn't working.
And this was deemed interesting by the annotators?
Yeah. Oh, that's different than this one.
Could you please repeat the professor's name?
Jim Fowler from Ohio State.
Well, I could just start at it. What is a series? We're trying to capture, with some precise mathematics, an intuitive idea. I've got a list of numbers. I'm imagining that I want to add up all of these numbers. But the list goes on forever. Well, I could just start adding. Here's the first number, plus the second number, plus the third number in my list. Just start adding up all of the numbers in my list. But if I'm really going to add up all of the numbers, I'd never finish. So what am I supposed to do? We'll use partial sums. What's a partial sum? Well, instead of trying to consider this series where
So we don't actually need to go through and learn what a partial sum is today. But now you want to know, right? And so what I'm trying to indicate here, right, is that we were able to have enough data and look at enough different components to say these are the pieces. And so if you look at what we were saying here in terms of being animated and passionate, looking at the camera, talking directly to the learner, which in this case is the camera, right? That these are things that Jim does. And I think an additional interesting component is that if you talk to Jim in real life, he is not going to be like up in your face like this. This is not his natural personality. This is his teaching personality, right? This is how he brings across his excitement and his love for math to bring people in and to keep them in the course and engaging in this concept that can be really difficult for learners, as most of us have struggled through, and keep them there. So we also dug into data from the non-annotation side, so just like what are some of the things that we can pull from the videos to try and understand what else is correlated with better retention. And so here we find that speaking faster is also, which I think goes really hand in hand with animation, or like being animated and being excited, and so that's part of it. We also found that having more frequent in-video quizzes correlate with better retention. Now, of course, tons of confounders here, right? So people that are putting in-video quizzes are thinking about that in a different way. And it's not just like randomly stopping and forcing someone to move forward, but to think about the content and to connect it. And then it goes back to this idea of, are you helping a learner understand or recognize their increase in understanding so that they can feel really satisfied with what they're doing in the course. one thing that we found to not really correlate strongly with retention is the length of the videos. And so there's a little bit there, but again, it depends what else, what all is going into that time. And so one thing that we found is that in constricting it to shorter videos, not only are you decreasing the amount of time that the learner needs to be watching that particular thing, but as the instructor, you're really thinking about what needs to go into this piece over these 5 minutes, these 7 minutes to teach this material really well. And so I think it's a lot of that preparation that goes into making it better, if it's well prepared, right, as opposed to just like cutting up something that's longer. So, and so what do we do with this information, right? So as educators, part of it is thinking about how do we share our passion, how do we get that across in what we're teaching so that learners kind of come on board with this journey. And part of it is, the motivation. So how are you keeping the learner in the class in the same way of like, how are you keeping a project team member in that team? And then I think as researchers, this shows, one, that we can pull some things from the data to then indicate how do you create good components for MOOCs that are going to keep learners there, that are going to help them be more satisfied. But again, that we need a lot of data to be able to pull this together and see what is true. This idea of interestingness is really cool because it's across all of these different topic areas. How can we find something that helps all educators kind of stay connected to the learners? But as you have more courses, as you're able to dive into things in a content-specific manner, then you're able to make even more direct recommendations. And so pulling that all together. With that, I just wanted to go back to this overall piece. This is just a little bit of what we're finding, pieces that we're trying to figure out and keep bringing back to the community. And I think overall the results continue to highlight the difficulty of talking about success of a MOOC, right? We need to come together as a community to figure out what are the different metrics that we want to be focusing on, and then figuring out what are the proxies that we're using to measure those and to optimize for them. And so observational studies that are looking at things from smaller data sets or individual courses might be harder to extrapolate across. But despite the difficulties, there really is factors that make sense to dive into further to understand how to create these really great courses that are having real impact on learners' lives. And I hope I've also shown how a critical look across a broad variety of information across a large group of courses can have an impact on information. And so this is a conversation and a discussion that we want to continue to be a part of with you, and we hope that we also inspire more collaborations across the content that you're working with and the research that you're doing to expand it out to be looking at even more data points as you dive into questions that are interesting to you to make it more feasible to extrapolate out to next steps. So with that, thank you. This is the rest of the team, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Microphone, please.
Oh, no, that's great.
How did you find, well, I had two questions. One, courses that you said had high credential, how did you how did you define that? Was it just because they had a lot of completers, or was that a self-assessed thing?
Money.
No. Yeah, so it's
Just money.
It's purchasing, well, it's
How much money did the course bring in credentials, right?
based on the number of people that complete it. Right, so it's not just sheer people that got the credential, but the proportion. So the proportion of learners that completed the course that thought that the value was something that they wanted to share through the certificate, and so they purchased the signature track option.
Oh, so it's purchases of signature tracks?
Yeah, of certificates from the group of people that actually completed the course.
Okay. And then the second one was, in that scatter plot you showed, how did you decide what went into each of those three buckets, the easy, medium, difficult?
So that was just dividing into thirds, into the distribution of like what was rated the hardest to the easiest, and then breaking those into three equal buckets of size of that difficulty distribution. So.
Yes.
So this is actually your lunchtime now, so just wonder if you need to.
Oh
go.
yeah, sorry. We can also break. I'm happy to just
but
be here
I can stay.
and take questions.
I'd like to take that calculus class now. But does anybody have another question?
Yeah, just to follow on that last question, was there sort of difficulty just sort of, judgment, or was that based on sort of a number of assignments or difficulty of test scores?
That was learner-rated difficulty. So it was on a scale of 1 to 5. As they were taking the course, they were asked to rank the difficulty of it.
Okay, and then my next question in terms of goals, since you're surveying, have you done or considering like asking people to define their own success metric and then identifying whether the course achieved it or not?
Yep, so we're definitely thinking about that and what are steps that we could do. So we used to have at the beginning of courses intent questions in terms of are you intending to complete the course or not, which is a little bit different than the goals. We do also are looking at having learners state their goals at the beginning of it. A lot of them, from what we found from the learner outcomes survey, are can be bucketed in either into career or educational, and so a big part of that difficulty is that those results are going to show up after the end of the course. But yes, we don't have a good answer for it, but it's definitely something that we're grappling with to figure out how to more directly connect goals to outcomes.
Okay, thank you. So, speakers will be around, so feel free to contact them if you have individual questions. Thank you. And lunch is in where you registered back